Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Don't Risk It podcast presented by VFIS Client Risk Solutions. This program focuses on the exposures our clients frequently encounter and discusses some potential solutions to help reduce these exposures. I'm your host, Chris Rogers with VFIS Client Risk Solutions, and today we're discussing record-keeping practices in your organization. Joining me on the program today are Mike Baker from the Client Risk Solutions team, also Scott Harkins. Scott is the Senior Vice President of Client Risk Solutions. Mike and Scott are here to discuss some best practices in regards to record keeping and how to better maintain those files. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today, and I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
Absolutely. So let's start off with a short and sweet question. Why is it important to keep comprehensive records?
Well, Chris, I think if you think about it, the records that you keep as an organization paints a picture of your organization. And you have to have records that show what you did or didn't do, because if you don't have the record, it's going to show that you didn't do it. For example, you're driving along in your fire truck and you get broadsided by an older gentleman at an intersection. They're going to ask for your maintenance records. They're not going to ask that gentleman most likely for his at any point in time. But failing to be able to produce those records puts you in a very poor light.
So in order to have a comprehensive record, what are some of the things that we need to have in that file?
Normally, Chris, you want to keep a little bit of records on almost anything that you have that's operational. So things that come to mind right off the top of my head would be personnel files, right? You want to guard yourself against employment issues. When did somebody become an employee or a volunteer? What training did they have? What have they done to acquire the talents and skills to be in that position that you have? And then let's go into just general assets that you have at the department or at the organization. Things like vehicle and fleet maintenance, fleet safety. When are the vehicles serviced? How are they serviced? Station maintenance. When was the roof replaced? When was the heating system serviced last? When were extinguishers maintained? Sprinkler systems. All those things go into the station maintenance. Let's go into the simpler stuff, financial. Everybody has financial assets. Where are things stored? How are they accessed? What financials do we have? What assets do we have? Security of those assets. And then, general daily operations. What are our response records, our trip sheets, our fire reports? Where do we respond to? Requests for documentation that we're going to receive from various outside external sources that are going to want copies of those reports. And then lastly, I would say a key important part that most organizations are probably good at is keeping organizational meeting minutes. What is the activities or goals or accomplishments of our organization on a monthly, daily, or quarterly basis that we have those meetings, and we want to record for public information the activities of the organization so we can publish those in an open forum as needed.
So the phrase document is very applicable in emergency services, from personnel to property to basically everything that we have in the house.
Yeah, I would probably throw a couple more documents in there because you can't do enough. So,
in the age of moving from written records to having, written files to electronic storage, can we talk about, how those records should be maintained?
Yeah, absolutely. The benefit of the electronics and stuff that we have now is we don't have to have paper files. I mean, paper files, if you think about it, even for one piece of apparatus, turns into a 3-inch notebook before you no longer have that vehicle in your fleet. So now we have the ability to store these in the cloud securely, and we should also keep a backup locally, hopefully that electronically also, so that you can secure it electronically. But if it's paper, those should also be secured depending on what the record actually is.
The nice thing about that too, and I'll add to Scott, is that they're searchable. Much easily search. You can search for brakes on engine 2 and easily find the date and time without leafing through that 3-inch binder. So certainly there's some added benefits to keeping them electronically over the traditional notebook approach.
And it certainly helps your logistics team because they get real-time information versus could be at the end of a shift, or, if it's the end of a 48-hour run, they might not get that information for several days. When with these newer systems, they're getting it probably an email almost immediately when the truck check is done that morning.
Yeah, and it's actually simplified the process too, because you can be on standby at somebody else's station and still be able to complete your truck checks, because most of it's being done off a smartphone these days, or an iPad. So that's with you, and you can actually do those types of checks. Goes right into your electronic system, and you have the ability to recall it, as you say, real time.
So let's delve into the personnel file side. What are some things that we should or should not keep in a personnel file?
I think you need to look at personnel files as a history of the individual. So you really want to have records of when that person came to you. So their application, any background checks, MVR checks, motor vehicle record checks that you've conducted on that individual should all be in that personnel file.
And Chris, the general stuff as well. I mean, most of these files are going to contain these things, but the demographics, who's my emergency contact, who are my beneficiaries, if something should happen, where's those things going to go to? And these are all things as well. The demographics, beneficiary, and emergency contact should be reviewed routinely on a regular basis to make sure that information is kept up to date.
I also think, if you're doing personnel reviews, so performance appraisals, disciplinary actions, all should be a part of that file. We also need to maintain training records for these individuals, but when we're talking about record keeping, there's almost a hierarchy of files that needs to be kept, because training records are going to be accessed by more than just your HR professional or the fire chief's office or whatnot. So those may be kept in a separate file, but we also want to have a record in that personnel file of what training they may have had. And I'll go one step further. If, as a VFIS client, if you've got employment practices coverage with us, we actually have an employment practices liability helpline available that if you have questions about what you should be keeping records of from a personnel standpoint, you can give them a call. It's an 800 number. It's 866-758-6874.
So that 1-800 number, that's just to get some insight or some guidance. That's not a replacement for legal counsel in the area that they might be having the issue.
That's correct. They'll probably point you to legal counsel, but it will be answered by an attorney, but they're not going to give you legal advice because of jurisdictional issues. So they're going to certainly point you in the right direction and answer questions that are global in nature, that, yes, you should maintain a record of that. Where there's questions, they will point you to legal counsel.
So how long should documents be kept in a personnel file? We have, with the ability of technology, it can be indefinite to some degree. So is there a certain time frame that we should look into?
So just like the HR helpline, the best advice I could probably give to that would be to reach out to whoever the authority having jurisdiction is on that legal issue and that you're looking at in particular, whether it be employment practices or just personnel files in general or training records. I would certainly resort to talking to that entity that has oversight for those functions. The other thing you could do is obviously contact legal counsel, which has some involvement with you on those particular issues as well, so they could provide you guidance to figure out where you need to be with the length of time for retaining those various documents. Some common obvious ones, that we talk about often are, things like your assets, like your vehicle and your property. Obviously, you want to keep those documents from the point of purchase till the time that you sell or discard those assets. It's always good to have a vehicle, registry of everything from nuts to bolts that you do on that vehicle from day one to the point that you get rid of it. Also helps you monitor the maintenance and cost of maintaining or upkeep of that vehicle to determine, exactly when the useful life of that vehicle might be reaching the end. And lastly, the personnel files go back to, again, that legal counsel who's going to help you with those things and to just kind of tell you how long you may need to keep those documents, even if they've separated from your organization. So.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, I think that you certainly want to be keeping exposure records for your employees / members. With a lot of the cancers and whatnot that you're seeing in emergency services, those exposure records are key to actually being able to present those claims to take best care of your members as you possibly can, even if it's after the fact. So I think those are important. one thing I'm not sure that we actually covered was, medical records are one of the things we need to be maintaining on individuals, but we also need to treat those a little bit differently than we do a lot of the records that we keep, because they need to be secured and only seen by certain eyes. And those eyes should be your medical control officers and only anybody that needs to see that. So I just wanted to make sure that we covered that.
Are there any other resources? We talked about the VFIS HR helpline. Are there any other resources or whatnot that could help clients with their record keeping processes? Maybe documents that could go in those files, like an inspection form for a property or something like that. Can you elaborate on that?
Chris, like in previous podcasts, we really refer to, there's a website we have called responderhelp.com. And that website is searchable for any number of topics. And for example, if you type in property inspection list, it'll go ahead and pull up a property inspection list and so forth that you can maintain or record documents on to help identify those things that you've completed on your various assets. Or when you go to the employment practice side, there's a whole section in there on employment practice, human resources. And again, many of those checklists and documentation materials are there.
And a full employee manual, I think, as well, is on there, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, gentlemen, that was a good summary of everything that we have in the record keeping area and some of the things that we suggest. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
And I want to thank you for listening to the program and for your interest in VFIS safety resources. I want to thank our guests, Scott Harkins and Mike Baker, once again for their time and information. Please consider subscribing to our program to stay up to date on new content releases. Also, if you like what you've heard, please consider leaving a review below. For more information about the many resources available from VFIS, please visit VFIS.com. And to submit ideas for future discussions, please reach out by emailing VFIS Risk Control at VFIS.com. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Gladfelter Insurance Group, VFIS, and its employees.